It is day 4,731 of Boswell being in business, and what a glorious day it is. We are so honored to be hosting Oliver Milman for the insect crisis in collaboration with Schlitz Audubon Nature Center. I just wanted to remind folks of a couple of things. This event is being recorded, so you can share it afterwards. And we are going to be taking questions, but we do ask people to put the questions in the chat box, which is just not the chat box, the Q&A box, Q&A, which is a little to the left of the chat. If you send something by chat, you can say where you're from and how happy you are to be here. If you send a question, I will write back to you and say, please put it in the chat box, because that's what we're looking at. So with that said, I am going to pass the microphone torch to Emily Leonard, a naturalist at Flitz Audubon Nature Center, who will tell you a little more about the wonderful center and introduce our authors. Thank you, Emily.
All right, yeah, thank you, Daniel. Hello, everyone. My name is Emily Leonard, and I am a naturalist educator and the citizen science coordinator at Schlitz Audubon Nature Center. So for those of you who may not be as familiar with us, Schlitz Audubon is a nonprofit nature center located just north of Milwaukee in Bayside, Wisconsin. We have just over 6 miles of hiking trails and around 185 acres, and are open to the public year-round. So we have a number of educational programs that we offer for adults and for families. Some of these programs have an insect focus, though right now our upcoming programs primarily revolve around spring phenological changes and bird migration. So you can find out more about all of the educational programs that we have to offer, as well as any citizen science research volunteer opportunities on our website. We do have a couple of citizen science projects that are focused on insects, so check us out if that's something that interests you. You can find all of this at schlitzaudubon.org. I believe we will post that in the chat box for you to reference. So I am just so excited to be a part of today's event and today's discussion. So while I spend most of my time right now working with the community and kind of the environmental education realm these days, I come from an academic background and a research background. I studied arthropod communities and plant-insect interactions, both in the Western United States and here in Wisconsin for several years prior to making my way to Schlitz Audubon and the Milwaukee area. So that being said, today's topic hits very close to home for me, as I'm sure it does for anyone in this Zoom call today. I found Oliver Newman's book to be just so captivating, admittedly frightening, but just so incredibly important. And the insect crisis has quickly become a favorite of mine that I've already been recommending to my students, colleagues, and peers. So again, I'm just really happy to be part of the discussion here and representing Schlitz Audubon in this collaboration and this series. So with that, I'd like to pass the conversation along to Dr. Sue Stuart-Smith, our conversation partner today. Dr. Stuart-Smith is a psychiatrist, psychotherapist, and the author of The Well-Gardened Mind, The Restorative Power of Nature. It's a Sunday Times best seller, listed as one of the 37 best books of 2020 by the Times, and Gardening Book of the Year by the Sunday Times. So thank you so much for being here today, Sue. I'll hand things over to you.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm really pleased to be interviewing Oliver about this work. I mean, his book, The Insect Crisis, is I think a very important book and a very timely book. And you know, it's his first book, but it's beautifully written. It's, as Emily said, quite captivating, but also, you know, sounds a very, very serious alarm call, really, that we do need to all sit up and take notice of what is happening to the insects around us and the decline that is happening, and the you know, catastrophic consequences that lie in store if we don't address the problems. So Oliver, I don't quite know where to start, but I think I'd really like to know how you decided to write the book, because I know you know, your work on The Guardian is writing about the climate crisis. So what really motivated you in writing this, or what inspired you?
Yeah, well, it's great to be with you, Sue, and everyone else here. So thanks so much for having me. In terms of the genesis of this book, I think I'll probably be as surprised as anybody a few years ago if somebody told me that my first book would be about insects, because working as an environmental correspondent, you're kind of drawn to the big kind of flashy things in our natural world, which are the orangutans, the rhinos, the Amazon rainforest, these big kind of conservation totems of our world. Climate change, of course, is all consuming. Everything to do with climate change is kind of a regular beat for me when it comes to day-to-day work. So the world of insects wasn't one I thought about beyond my kind of natural kind of interest in the natural world. I mean, as a kid, I used to kind of poke around on the logs and rocks looking at ants and earwigs and so on. I was fascinated by them, but the idea that they were somehow in trouble and that their demise could threaten us never really occurred to me up until about maybe 5 years ago now, when these series of studies started coming out showing these huge declines, like absolutely startling declines, numbers you don't normally see in conservation biology. 75% declines, 80% declines, 98% declines in one study out of Puerto Rico. So I was kind of really struck by that, because it seemed startling that there could be such a decline going on of creatures we consider to be so ubiquitous and so kind of with us at all times. I mean, they seem to be everywhere. They're the closest animal to us, I feel, in our day-to-day lives, other than our pets, other than our cats and dogs. I mean, and a lot of those interactions obviously are not fun for us when we think about mosquitoes and if you're stung by a wasp or something, but they are there and they are crucially important. And the more I kind of looked into it and spoke to scientists about what was going on, I realized this is probably the conservation tale of our time. Is the most consequential loss of biodiversity going on in the world, and yet the least known. This kind of silent kind of catastrophe kind of playing out around the world, and we're not really appreciating it. And I realize, obviously, the world is not short of problems right now. We've got a few, but one of the most profound and long-lasting may well be this crisis of the tiny empires that keep us afloat.
It sounds like those studies that you encountered 5 years ago functioned as a bit of a wake-up call for you. I mean, brought it to your attention.
Yeah.
And as you say, everybody focuses on the sort of the more romantic stories in a way. Whether it's the polar bears or the tigers, or it's the sort of the great beasts and so on. And that culturally we don't value insects at all. Although, as you intimate, children are fascinated by them often.
Yeah.
And I was really struck in the book where you write about that, because it made me remember that our daughter, when she was only just beginning to talk, she was fascinated by ladybirds and carried on, throughout her childhood, loving ladybirds. And it was actually her first word, apart from sort of no and yes and mummy and daddy, because she loved these insects. And she would spend hours in the garden sort of observing them and watching them on the flowers and so on. So I sort of had a sense, one of the things you were communicating to us culturally was kind of what happens to that, that children are naturally drawn to insects. And it's as if we learn to think of them as baddies, and I think we're a bit like that with bacteria at the moment. We've thought of bacteria as baddies, and then we're now waking up to the fact that we need them for the microbiome.
Yeah, we've got a real kind of topsy-turvy, upside-down view of the world in terms of what's important to us and the functioning of our environment in general. I mean, like you say, kids love insects. I mean, you speak to entomologists who do outreach in schools, and they say, 4 and 5-year-olds, when they go into school, they love insects. They think they're really cool and they're fascinated by their abilities and they want to touch them and be around them. So it's not like we're innately afraid of them and you know, distasteful of them. We're fascinated by them as children, but by the time those same entomologists will go back to high schoolers with insects, they are they're kind of repulsed by them, or at least, you know, nonplussed. I mean, they don't have that kind of connection. They've lost that kind of magical kind of trait that they have. So it's certainly a cultural aspect. I mean, that was one of the most interesting parts of writing this book. I mean, there's a lot of science in there about declines and what that means. But I think one of the most interesting facets of the book is that kind of cultural question. It's, you know, why we do not appreciate the things that actually are keeping the show on the road when it comes to how the world functions. And that neglect has played out in quite kind of devastating ways.
I think it's one of the achievements of your book, actually, that it seemed to me that your love of insects and fascination was rekindled in writing the book. And certainly as a reader, I felt very drawn in to a kind of new way of looking at, I mean, as you highlight, the kind of insects that we kind of think of as the nasties, you know, the flies, the wasps, you know, the mosquitoes and so on. I love the bit about the mosquitoes doing their like their little mating song, flapping their wings. But I think you do communicate something of that magic, and that's really what is going to help us, I think, motivate us as much as self-interest, isn't it, in terms of the catastrophic consequences?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, there's kind of a million named species of insects. How many of those do we think fondly of? Maybe a bumblebee, honeybees, certainly, you know, always the face of any kind of Save the Bees campaign is a honeybee, even though it is a managed bee, it's not a wild bee, it's kind of kept like a pig or a cow, really. And butterflies, we find butterflies pretty, but you know, there's millions of others, because there's probably 5 million, maybe 10 million species of insects out there we don't know. We don't think much about the others. I mean, it's a whole world of life there that we just don't think about, don't appreciate, don't value. And I kind of, by kind of looking into, you know, the lives of these creatures, speaking to those who study them, you kind of uncover an amazing trove of incredible information around what they can do. I mean, bees are amazing in themselves. Their logistical abilities, the fact that bumblebees can be taught to play football, they can remember good and bad experiences, they will give up sleep to look after their hive's young, they you know, they can count. I mean, bees in themselves are amazing, but also, you know, beetles. I mean, 350,000 types of beetle in the world. I mean, it's kind of orders of magnitude more than all the types of fish or mammals in the world. There's this amazing array of life that we haven't really kind of thought about consciously, I think, until now, until we're kind of really starting to realize what it means to lose them. And what it means to lose them is terrible. I mean, we may, like we were talking about before with the big charismatic megafauna, which is this very kind of unlovely term, but it's the kind of term we use for the tigers and lions and giraffes and so on. I mean, losing those creatures would be an horrendous crime, and, you know, would lose a great deal from our world by losing them, but they wouldn't cause the collapse of our food system. You wouldn't see your forests start to fail because of the loss of them, although they are obviously important in local ecosystem contexts. You know, insects underpin much of life as we know it, and so the consequences of losing is far more than many of the creatures that we spend so much kind of time, effort, and money in raising the profile for their care. Pandas being one of them.
I mean, and it strikes me that actually, in terms of education, I don't know what your thoughts are on education and how we can improve it, but you know, that actually that the sort of we've been rather blind to the foundational role that insects play, So maybe this should be being communicated and taught alongside the phase of fascination that children almost universally seem to go through.
Yeah, and you may start seeing that awareness now. I mean, 2017, where this kind of landmark study came out of Germany, which found that there'd been 3/4 of all flying insects had disappeared from nature reserves in Germany since 1989, which is an incredible loss that they found through trapping them in these sites across the country. That kind of sparked this whole kind of media kind of outpouring that you saw. You started getting terms like insectageddon, insect apocalypse now becoming in the kind of mainstream discourse. So that has changed. You've seen that kind of narrative change quite quickly just in the last kind of five years or so. So I think there is a kind of awareness, and there have been previous concerns obviously about bees through colony collapse disorder and things like that. But I think in the last 5 years, I think it's crystallized a lot of people that, oh, okay, yeah, I kind of get that there are problems with how we're doing things, how that may impact bees, butterflies, and other insects, and how your own recollections change. I mean, I've had so many people email me to say, oh, I remember sitting out the back in the porch at night with a light, and there were so many bugs around the light that I had to kind of flee inside. I don't have to do that anymore. I used to drive across the country and have to stop every couple of hours to scrape the dead bugs off the windscreen. I don't have to do that now. I mean, there is that kind of dawning realization that something is amiss, and maybe they're not quite as everywhere as we once thought.
Yes, and I suppose that's probably quite a good moment to sort of to try and maybe you could just unpick a little bit, because there's so many factors in this, aren't there? There isn't just one cause to address. It's wrapped up in climate change, in rising temperatures, environmental chemicals, certain viruses and fungi and so on, infections that are plaguing insect populations that are less resilient than they used to be. I don't know. I mean, yeah,
there's not one thing we're doing to hammer insects. We're doing lots of things at once.
Yeah, I know. Yes.
I mean, if you're a bee, you kind of look around, and once was kind of wildflower meadows and kind of undisturbed grasslands and forests is now monocultural farming, tracts of land, featureless kind of plains of soy or corn or wheat or whatever it is. No kind of flowering plants at the edge of that field in many cases. And even if you can survive that desert, you'll probably be poisoned because we've laid so many chemicals on agriculture. The toxicity of US agriculture is now 48 times higher than it was 25 years ago. There's just been consistent layering of poison in the environment. And that model of farming, of monocultural crop, farmed up to the edge, no weeds as they call them. Again, weeds is culturally a subjective term. It's just a plant we think is in the wrong place, but that's food and shelter for an insect, and it's been removed everywhere. Our kind of obsession with tidiness. So that model of farming and rigid kind of tidiness has been exported from the US and Europe, and now is taking hold around the world, and that's pretty disastrous for insects. I mean, they've been kind of locked into this horrible cycle of habitat loss, pesticide use, now climate change. So it's pretty unbearable in terms of the conditions for a lot of insect species.
Yeah, and light pollution is another factor, isn't it?
Yeah, light pollution is one of those that is kind of frustratingly simple. I mean, you think we could kind of get to grips with that one pretty easily, but no, we've decided to kind of flood the night sky with light from all kinds of places: our homes, sports stadiums, airports, wherever you kind of care to look. There's light, isn't there? And in most cities now, you never get kind of pitch darkness. You have this kind of gloom, don't you? This kind of glow. where it's kind of almost like twilight at all times. And that, yeah, it's extremely harmful for insects, especially, I mean, most notably fireflies or glowworms or lightning bugs, or whatever you want to call them. They rely upon the night sky for their messaging to each other, for mating. But there's lots of other insects too that rely upon that very kind of reliable switch between day and night, which has been hardwired into insects and all other animals, of course, for their behaviors, for feeding, for mating, and it can drive them mad. And I mean, the symbol of that, the avatar of that, is probably the moth circling the light till it's kind of dies of exhaustion or is eaten by a predator. But there's lots of other insects that suffer from that too. So yeah, that's one kind of maybe simple thing that we could maybe change about our environments that would do insects a lot of good.
It would, wouldn't it? And I think it would help people too, because in a less dramatic way, maybe people do suffer from light pollution as well, and particularly screens and, you know, the way that those kind of forms of artificial light permeate our lives, that we've lost touch with the kind of biological rhythms of life, really. And that's kind of what you're talking about with the insects, is that they're unable to function biologically because they can't tune in to these simple cycles of day and night.
Yes. And I mean, you'll know this more than anybody here about the mental health benefits of connecting with nature. But I mean, there's been lots of work done showing about how, you know, you're looking at a screen just before you go to sleep. It's not very beneficial for you. Being in touch with that natural rhythm of nature is actually highly beneficial. And I feel just more interesting and kind of vibrant in terms of a place to be. I mean, you go to places that haven't been manicured to death and covered in chemicals, don't have light, and it's a wonderful place to be. You kind of have, you know, the wildflowers growing up around your knees. You have this kind of thrumming life around you of insects, and you can hear it, you can see it. It's a kind of magical kind of place to be, and we've kind of banished that. We've pushed that kind of that kind of growth of nature to the margins of our life. We've kind of tried to order it away as being somehow undesirable. If we just let a little bit that wildness back in, I think we'd benefit so many aspects of our lives, as well as insects, of course.
Yeah, and you know, as a gardener, I'm it's something I'm really keen on, is the whole concept of wildlife gardening, but I do think it entails a profound shift in aesthetics and aesthetic values, and there's a great deal of resistance to it. I don't know whether you've followed over here that you know, for the last few years the campaign for No Mow May has been gathering momentum, really. And I think it was probably on Twitter, somebody had posted something saying, because the problem is, if you don't mow your grass and in you're living in suburbia, your neighbors look out of their windows and they're really cross with you because you're neglecting the neighborhood. That, you know, it doesn't matter what's happening for the insects, and many people are oblivious of the benefits of it. But what this person said, the solution is that you mow a path through you let your grass turn into a meadow, and then instead of the whole garden becoming a sort of bit of a mess, you mow a path through it, a kind of snaking path, so that it actually looks deliberate. Yes. And that this seemed to work. I mean, so I think that, you know, it's about how do we change this shift from this is terribly destructive. I mean, the environmental consequences of the immaculate lawn, you know, the overwatered, you know, overfed, herbicide drenched rather, you know, it's how do we shift from that, because it's been dominant for so long. So we do have to come up with a new aesthetic, and I do think some of that is about recovering that childhood sort of glee and love of the wild. Yes,
no, I completely agree. I mean, it is very much a Western phenomenon as well. You go to China, there isn't this kind of obsession with tidy lawns. They're in kind of public places, but not, you know, it's very much the American dream really is to have a two-car garage in this kind of very kind of lush lawn. which is cut down to the quick and doesn't have plants within it. Essentially, again, a desert, a mini desert. I mean, one of the most remarkable facts I found out from the book is, through the writing of the book, is that lawns are actually the largest irrigated crop in America. I mean, it's 3 times the size in area compared to the land set aside for corn. I mean, a huge amount of land is set aside for lawn, and it's aesthetically what is now considered the norm and what you should aspire to. And like you say, some homeowners groups and neighborhood groups even will knock on your door if you let that kind of be untamed in any way. But it's very destructive. It's very regressive in terms of wildlife, and it's boring. I mean, I feel it's
well, absolutely.
It's a dull. I mean, it's you got the same as everybody else, and it's just a sward of grass and nothing else there. It's quite a kind of lifeless, sterile place, and for some reason we have elevated that sterility up above any other consideration. And
I think it's a legacy of much deeper, and if we trace the roots of the climate crisis, back centuries ago, the human need and desire to control nature, to tame nature, to manipulate and to dominate nature, and I suppose if you think about further back, the relationship with nature, in them, that you can understand some of those origins. Nature is something terrifying, and civilization trying to establish something civilized feels very precarious, and nature, the wilderness needs to be kept at bay, and so on. But we've gone so far beyond that. It's now the reverse, isn't it? And it's about how can we help, I suppose, help shift that perception and understand. And I think actually mental health can be is another way into it, because it's very clear from the research into the kind of natural environments that are most restorative, that the as you say, the neatly manicured lawn is not. It may be better than some other environments, a sort of dusty highway, but actually it's not restorative when you compare it to a parkland that's actually quite rich in biodiversity. So there's a very close correlation between the amount of biodiversity in a garden or a park, or a city park, and how restorative it is for people who spend time in it.
Oh yeah, entirely. And it doesn't take that much actually for insects to spring back into our world. I mean, I've been to a green roof project in New York, where in an industrial area of Brooklyn, Greenpoint, where it's former oil lubricants factory, and on the roof they put a wildflower meadow. And you just see this kind of life spring back. I mean, it doesn't take much to have these kind of little oases of life, even in kind of quite densely populated urban areas. So, I mean, if we could focus on kind of bringing back some of that wildness to our surrounds, I feel we would benefit in so many ways. The trouble is, like you say, we've kind of seen ourselves as apart from nature. We've seen ourselves as kind of floating above it, as if we're some omnipotent God, not connected to it. And it only is when we get these horrible shocks, whether it be through climate change or food insecurity, or now the kind of crisis with insects, that we're kind of jolted to kind of realize that we actually are all connected to nature. We're a part of this web of life, and you cannot kind of blow up the foundations of life without being affected in some way.
No. And I think the food insecurity, the issue comes across very strongly in your book. I think it's probably what in terms of the the catastrophic consequences.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the leading kind of worry, I think, for most scientists looking at this. United Nations has warned that there's kind of a looming food security crisis because we've got a growing global population at a time of kind of crashing pollination in many parts of the world. There's this kind of deficit now growing between what can be grown compared to what's in demand. So yeah, I mean, insects, bees, obviously, most famously, but also flies, butterflies, other insects. They pollinate about a third of the food we eat. I mean, you wouldn't have kind of apples and melons and cranberries, and almonds and broccoli, and all kinds of other things without them. And there is a worry that with the loss of pollination, we're going to see deficits. We're going to see malnutrition. There's one study estimating we could see an extra 1 million deaths a year from around the world from conditions such as heart disease and other sorts of illnesses because of that malnutrition, because that lack of nutrition coming from those colourful fruits and vegetables that insects provide us. So it is a kind of looming concern. There is a crunch point that's going to come when it comes to pollination and food security. And of course, it's going to be the poorer parts of the world that are going to suffer the worst because prices are going to go up. And unless there's a good response to that, they're the ones who are going to be at the pointy end of that.
But I think no one's going to be untouched by it, are they?
No, we're all going to be affected by it in some way, either through more expensive food, scarcer food. I mean, some supermarkets have done some interesting stunts where they just removed all the food that's been pollinated by a bee to kind of demonstrate what would be lost. And I mean, if you walk through the fruit and veg aisle, you'd be hard pressed to find much. I mean, you have wind pollinated crops, of course. You have your wheat and rice and so on, but all the kind of colourful stuff, the stuff that you'd actually provide you with nutrition, is quite heavily dependent on insects. I mean, even if you think about the fun stuff we eat, the chocolates depends on a tiny midge to pollinate the cacao plant.
Yes, that was fascinating. I didn't know that. There were so many fascinating things in your book that I learned such a lot. I
mean, who would think that, every kind of bite of a Cadbury's bar or a Hershey's bar is dependent on this tiny midge? Nobody would. I think a lot of people, if they could press a button to get rid of all midges in the world, a lot of people would, because they would find them annoying or pointless. But you'd be without chocolate, you'd be without ice cream, because alfalfa is pollinated by insects that feed cows for dairy to produce ice cream. So unless you like the vegan stuff, you'd be without ice cream too. I mean, I think we've completely lost sight of all the connections in our world. We think we're somehow apart from it all. And until these problems really start to bite, I think a lot of people will remain oblivious to that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that really interested me about, in terms of you writing this book, was because it is very alarming, and it's hard at points in the book not to feel unbearably gloomy about it. Is how did you manage that yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I do have kind of been battle hardened to gloom, covering the climate crisis. Day-to-day work is often quite grim. It was quite hard at times to kind of look through this and realize actually, okay, this is actually far more worrying than I thought, because I realized there was a problem. But when you start speaking to entomologists and looking at the research done in the field and going out seeing what the situation's like, yeah, it was actually worse than I thought it would be, which did make me feel a little down. There were obviously lots of good work being done out there to remedy these problems, lots of really good, knowledgeable, fun people to be around who are doing work to try and restore insects, try and raise awareness of these problems and so on. So I kind of hope to add a little bit of hope in the second half of the book, after hitting people with a lot of misery at the start, that there is a way, there is a path out of this, much like the mown path of your neighbour's untidy garden. There is a way through this kind of mess. It will take some big things, but lots of small things that are achievable. And so,
I mean, maybe it would be good if you could highlight some of those, actually, I think.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, we've, the EU's done some good work in banning the main class of neonicotinoids, which are the kind of worst types of pesticides for bees and butterflies and other insects. So there is that kind of policy response that could be embraced in the US and other countries too, to reduce the kind of load of pesticides. Because I think the frustrating thing for a lot of entomologists is they don't even really work that well. These pesticides put on fields don't improve crop yields that much, so that the land is becoming far more toxic, and we're not getting the benefit from more food. So there could be, should be a big rethink on farming practices. Work is being done on wildlife corridors, which I think is incredibly important to connect these ecosystems that are now so marooned, so isolated because of monocultural farming, the calming of our landscapes. So farmers are being paid or encouraged in some countries now to have kind of wildflowers or berms at the side of their fields to grow plants that give insects a pathway through the kind of patchwork of fields. So that work's being done and is quite encouraging in some places. Habitat loss, obviously, everybody is pretty much against deforestation, yet we're still chopping down most of the world's trees. And climate change, there's many reasons to act on climate change, and this is another one. But I mean, I do kind of highlight some of the kind of smaller things that can be done. And one entomologist put it to me that we need more of a kind of inaction plan rather than an action plan. We just need to kind of let go a bit, just let things slide a bit. If you have a garden, just don't mow the grass that often. Don't put chemicals all over it. Don't rake the leaves in your yard, because insects like to scurry under there. Just let things have this kind of bohemian untidiness, I think somebody called it, this kind of wildness. Let that back in, and you will see that they come bouncing back quite quickly. I mean, they're quite resilient. They are the great survivors of our world, after all. They survived 5 mass extinctions. They've outlasted the dinosaurs. If we give them just a little bit of breathing room, they can come kind of surging back. And then one ecologist said to me, it's like they're a log on water and we're pressing our foot down on the log and submerging it. But if we just ease off a little bit, they can bob back up. And the big question is, what's going to be left when we do let it bob back up? That remains to be seen, I think.
I mean, it came across to me that the greatest survivor you write about is the cockroach.
Yes. Yeah.
They seem to be able to survive and cope with anything.
Yeah.
I found the passages on the cockroaches really, really fascinating.
Yeah, again, it's another one of those creatures that I didn't really think about, other than to think yuck previously. But if you think about them in a kind of objective way, they are incredible. They are amazing. They can survive 2 weeks after being beheaded. They can fit into these tiny cracks. They can bite with a force 50 times the size of their weight of their body. They're incredibly fast and dexterous. And the 2 species that we know about most, the American and the German cockroach, which are the ones you'll see scuttling across your kitchen floor, they are the ultimate survivors because they've adapted to humans in an incredible way. I mean, they actually benefit from our presence in the world. They like our homes. They like the food we leave out. They're doing pretty well. I mean, I think that's an important point with the insect crisis, is there are going to be winners and losers. It's not like we're going to wipe out all insects. We will almost certainly leave this planet before insects do. But the composition of them is being changed. So we're seeing far fewer of the things that we value and love and rely upon. And we're creating a world for cockroaches and mosquitoes, as well as kind of rats and raccoons and other things that are adapted to the age of humans. So yeah, cockroaches are the great survivors, and they're doing pretty well with us. I mean, not
but
just
also scientifically and medicinally, potentially, very, very useful.
Yeah, there's a huge cockroach farm in China. They used to breed them for traditional medicines that have been used for years in China, but have actually been found through scientific study to actually be helpful for people's ailments, digestive problems, and skin issues, and so on. So they actually are really useful. They have properties within their bodies that could potentially help us with antibiotic resistance, because they obviously can survive pretty much any kind of chemical attack. So
yeah, I thought that was fascinating, really.
They can form the basis for a new class of medicines for us. And ecologically they're important too. I mean, most species of cockroach, and there are thousands of them, I think about 5,000 species of cockroach, most of them live in forests, and they do important work to recycle nutrients and keep the whole ecology of the forests going. So as much as we despise cockroaches, they do have their place in the world just like everything else, and there would be detrimental consequences if they were all wiped out.
No, that comes across very strongly. I thought you elevated the cockroach very successfully, actually.
It was a tough job, but somebody had to do it. Yeah,
somebody has to do it. I think so. I mean, I do think it's a really important book, Oliver, and I think it both inspires and alarms, and I think you hold those two in balance very successfully, and that's partly because it is beautifully written as well. And one thing I'm aware of is that you actually wrote it during the lockdowns of the pandemic, which also must have been quite tough. Yeah,
I think I was saying to you before, if it was kind of the opposite of a kind of Zen writing retreat, that was my experience. I was in a small apartment in Brooklyn with two young children, quite a neurotic dog, stuck amid a pandemic. So it wasn't ideal conditions, I suppose. Quite challenging at times, in fact, because I do have a day job, but luckily I didn't have much of a life in 2020 outside work. I couldn't really go out anywhere, so most nights were spent thinking about beetles and bed bugs and mosquitoes.
Yes. But you did manage eventually to do a little bit of traveling.
Yeah, I got lucky just before the kind of pandemic kind of lockdowns hit in early 2020. I managed to get to Mexico, which was a magical trip. Actually, I went to central Mexico, the mountains there, where the monarch butterfly migration ends from the US and Canada down. They overwinter there, and I took a horse. Actually, I rode a horse up into the mountains to see the groves of trees where millions of monarch butterflies, these orange and black butterflies, just cloak the trees. So much so that the branches kind of sag. It was a magical experience, really. And they all kind of rouse themselves and fly off at once, and it's just clouds of them everywhere. It was really incredible. Of course, it's like everything else, it's under threat. Climate change means that migration will probably end within a few decades. So it was wonderful to see it while it was still there.
Mm-hmm. Were there any other sort of wonderful moments like that?
Yeah, there were. I mean, I went to California to see the incredible movement of honeybees from all across the US to California for the almond pollination. There's this kind of jamboree where millions of hives are sent to pollinate this one crop. So it was incredible to see the amount of kind of hives there. I managed to get stung on the face. I didn't get any sympathy from the beekeepers there, because that's just kind of par for the course for them.
Yeah.
But that was really interesting, and you kind of learn about this whole new world of agriculture you didn't really know about. I mean, the fact that there are people who work as bee brokers, they match up beekeepers with farmers to kind of ensure they have the right pollination. And that job is so lucrative. The bee broker I hung around with, she only works 2 months a year. She can play golf the rest of the year because she gets enough money from matching, being this kind of matchmaker. But it's also a symptom of obviously how stretched and how valuable that pollination is. It's a kind of constant work to kind of keep up the number of bees needed for pollination. I mean, being a beekeeper used to be this kind of bucolic kind of hobby, didn't it? So
Yeah.
a couple of hives, you'd have some honey for your toast. That's about it. Now it's kind of, you're like in US, you're a contracted worker who has to keep up a number of bees from disease and other kind of effects through all kinds of artificial means to keep those numbers up, and then move them around the country to essentially ensure the food supply remains upright. I mean, it's quite a kind of laborious, kind of thankless job, but it's become quite lucrative to the point that there are actually bee rustlers out there, which I document in the book. The people who actually steal beehives from the backs of trucks because pollination has become so valuable that they can sell them on.
Yeah, they've become a commodity in their own right, haven't they?
Yes, yeah, they've become like diamonds or something. It's, that getting into that world was really interesting for sure.
Well, I think there are probably lots of questions mounting up, and I think it's time now to have a look at them and see what people are. Let's have a look and see where we can start. So Shirley Hildebrandt asks, are there certain families or species that are more in peril or whose populations are more noticeably crashing?
That's a good question. Yes, butterflies certainly are. I went out with a butterfly expert in California who said, we're on our walk 30 years ago, we would have seen 10 species. This time we'd be lucky to see one. And we didn't see any. So that was quite grim. So there's lots of butterflies who are suffering from climate change, drought, other afflictions, because they are quite delicate in terms of obviously the conditions that they can endure. Bumblebees, I mean, 1 in 4 bumblebee species in the US is declining. Bumblebees are certainly down in the UK and Europe too. So, they don't cope well with a warmer world. They're also being affected by pesticides as well. So they're not doing very well. I mean, wherever you look, really, I mean, research hasn't been done on all insect categories, but certainly those are the ones I'd pick out as being particularly vulnerable at the moment.
Well, I think following on from that, there's a question from Peter Messer saying, is Ecologistus optimisticus a vanishing species? And what are the realistic expectations over the next 100 years?
No, there are optimists out there. The realistic expectations, I mean, it really depends on the kind of path we choose to follow, I suppose. I think at some point there is certainly going to be a food security crunch point that won't kind of leap out on us like COVID-19 with that speed, but will creep up upon us until we've realised it's a very serious problem. How we manage that, of course, will be the crucial thing. Will we kind of double down on the problems that have led us that way, or will we find a new path through? I think one of the key decisions will be this century, the next 100 years, is how you respond to a world with 10 billion people in it. Do you, to feed that number of people, do you cut down rainforest, other forests for more farmland, to grow more food? Or do you more intensively farm the land you already have, or find new farming techniques such as indoor vertical farming with hydroponics, soilless kind of farming, that kind of innovations? I mean,
well, and you mentioned towards the end of the book that people may need to start eating insects in order to save them.
Yes, counterintuitive.
Insect protein and replacing.
Yeah, that would actually be helpful for them, ironically, because our current model of raising meat in particular, particularly beef, is so destructive environmentally in terms of air and water pollution, climate change, deforestation. It's hugely detrimental to all species, but insects included. So raising a trillion crickets in a shipping container doesn't take much pollution or space to do that, to destroy an ecosystem to do that. And they are, by all accounts, very tasty, good source of protein, zinc, vitamins. Yeah, go for it. Eat your insect.
I haven't tried one.
No, I'm a vegetarian.
There's something in the chat, somebody's saying gross. It's going to take quite a bit, isn't it?
I mean, that's again comes back to the cultural question, isn't it? Because cultures around the world have eaten insects for generations and generations. It's us in the West who think they're a bit icky. There are some restaurants now including insects in dishes, and you can get these ground up protein bars with crickets in them. They're apparently very good, but I haven't tasted them myself.
Yeah, I mean, there's a question about how do non-Indigenous plants affect the insect community?
Badly, in a kind of broad sense. I mean, it depends on the plant, doesn't it? But
I think it does. I don't know. I mean, it's I think it's a controversial area.
Yeah.
I think some non-Indigenous plants are actually quite good for biodiversity.
Yeah.
So
and
I don't think there's one
uniform answer. No. I mean, insects, their success has been through adaptation, really. They've managed to adapt to all kinds of new conditions, new plants. Obviously, the changes we're wreaking now in terms of moving species around the world, unlike what's ever happened before, really. But yeah, I don't think there is a one-size-fits-all answer. But certainly, for certain native pollinators, if there's new exotic plants that they don't know, that's bad for them. They don't know. They have no experience with them, so therefore.
My understanding is there's a sort of trade-off as well, that actually diversity is one thing, and diversity and complexity is good for biodiversity, and that may mean that if there's some non-Indigenous plants in there, that's not a disaster. What is a disaster is when you get non-Indigenous plants that kind of really become rampant and take over vast swathes of land. That is a problem. But I think if they're mingled in, they can actually be a benefit. So I think it depends on the type of non-Indigenous.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all like kind of imported exotic ornamental plants to look at aesthetically. Like you say, though, you don't need to have those uniformly everywhere. You can mix them in with some native plants. I mean, yeah, insects can find a way if they're just given a bit of a chance.
Yeah, I can see there's a couple of questions about lawns, actually. Carol Siri writes about how she's tried to grow the lawn, but the grass has been replaced by Creepy Charlie. Quite sure what Creepy Charlie is, actually, what we would call that in the UK. And it's still one single type of plant. Therefore, do we need to be tending our lawns to foster diversity? And a very similar question from Sarah Coffey: how much of the lawn should be wilded to make a difference? Should it be planted with diverse wild plants that aren't a massive bindweed? How do we start to make a difference? I think you have to sort of see what happens. That's my feeling about it. And maybe you do have to do some oversowing with wildflowers, or introduce the kind of flowers, a lot of annual flowers, those lovely colourful annual flowers. poppies and Ischolzia and verbena. You know, the pollinators love them, and they're actually very good at spreading themselves once you introduce them.
Yes, I'd agree with that. There was an ecologist I spoke to who did a study looking at what does it take for insects to survive in a field of single crop, and she found you need 10% of that to be weed, what we can call weeds, for insects to survive. I'm not saying that ratio would apply exactly to people's gardens, because obviously that's a little different. But if you're thinking about, a significant small part of your garden set aside for what would be considered, weeds, but essentially wildflowers, that would be a good thing to aim for. Yeah, and diversity, like you say, is key, because different insects like different plants.
Absolutely, yeah. And so then those insects, those different species find their niche within it, and so you can support more different kinds of insects.
And then you get this virtuous cycle as well, where if you track back the big bugs, you can control the pests. But as you know, wasps are kind of hated as being this kind of terrorizer of picnics, but they actually eat kind of aphids and other kind of pests that would be considered detrimental to your plants. So actually attracting in those kind of bigger predator insects is useful.
Yeah, so Margaret Harvey asks, is it true there are regulations in the EU that farmers are not allowed to use any chemicals in a 50-meter strip around the field?
There is a system, I think, of payments whereby they are given money to put wildflowers at the borders. Yeah, and you wouldn't spray those, no.
I'm just having another look. I'm afraid I can see people are complaining I'm not looking at the chat, but I don't think I can look at the chat and the Q&A. So if somebody wants to communicate something, please put it in the Q&A. So let's have a look here. So Diane Chesko asks, some non-native insects have been so successful. Marmorated stink bugs, Chinese praying mantises, for example. Would you please comment on the dangers or not of non-natives? And actually somebody else has asked the same question, Scott Prill. What about the effect of non-native insects on the local environment, e.g. murder hornets?
Yeah, I have a bit in the book about murder hornets. Luckily they're not murdering people, it's bees that they decapitate. But yeah, that is a concern. Species like that, I mean, where I'm in New York, spotted lanternflies are pretty much all over the place now, and they successfully got a kind of foothold here. I mean, different invasive species have different impacts, don't they? I mean, some are benign, some become food for other animals, some integrate well, and a lot of them are harmful. I mean, some of the ones you've listed there are quite harmful for trees, local environment, the balance of ecologies and so on. So yeah, it is an issue. I mean, that comes down to kind of much bigger questions around global trade, travel, how we kind of interact with each other. There's no real kind of easy answer to that, because once an invasive species is introduced, it's usually quite hard to get rid of them, and some of the schemes to get rid of them have proved disastrous in the past. We think about Australia, for example, tried to get rid of an invasive beetle by getting cane toads from South America and releasing them, and now those toads are the most hated pest. They've spread all across Australia, and there's been similar kind of instances in other countries too. So yeah, there's not a simple answer to that one. They do have an effect for sure. But yeah, solving that is one of the trickier conundrums. Yeah,
actually a couple of people have raised the question of ash borers. Should we not be trying to get rid of them? And that, they're damaging our trees. And also the fire ant. How should we view them?
I mean, I don't through this book, I don't hope to convince everybody that every insect is wonderful for your own lives, and that you should not try and get rid of any of them in any circumstance. I mean, I think there are kind of, I've heard about all kinds of kind of organic treatments and non-chemical treatments used to get rid of fire ants, for example, because obviously they are a problem in Texas and some other places. And yeah, wood borers, you know, they need to be dealt with. I mean, it's not, I don't think you can see many conservation groups kind of up in arms about the loss of them. I mean, again, these come back to kind of bigger, broader questions of what we're doing to the planet. I mean, when I was in Mexico, the monarch butterflies were on the downward slope because of climate change, but because of that heating up of the atmosphere, little bark beetles were increasing in number. So we're swapping monarch butterflies, which we kind of deify in verse and art, and replacing them with these tiny little brown beetles that eat away at trees. Through, you know, we've done that unintentionally, but it's certainly been a consequence of our own actions.
There's a couple of people sort of asking you about the writing process. Hayley Wasserman asks, could you talk about your reporting process and how that influenced your writing? And do you have any tips on getting the general public to really listen to your lessons and your work?
Oh, goodness. That's a really good question. I mean, I think the writing process obviously took a while, the gathering of facts and interviews. We had 200 pages of interviews with various scientists and others for the book. So it was certainly a slog. Once I got the structure of the book set in my mind, though, and how it would open and then unfurl into these other chapters, I found it fairly simple to write. Obviously, much longer than anything I'd normally do in journalism. So it was kind of a feat of endurance for me as much as anything, because I'd never written anything more than 2,000 words, and here I am writing 75,000 odd. So that in itself obviously requires discipline and keeping, rather than just thinking about it as, you know, 9 long magazine articles, having a kind of common thread that goes through that. So I try to kind of bring the reader back to previous moments, previous characters, you know, people that they may have remembered from before. I kind of reintroduce them to, try and tie these things together so they're not all separated out. But yeah, it's certainly been a kind of eye-opening experience about how, you know, book authorship and the publishing world differs from journalism and the media.
Well, I think you managed it very successfully, actually. I think I'm aware of time. We're running out of time, aren't we? And there is one question here which I was also very keen to ask you, which is about you know, authors who've inspired you, and what nature books would you recommend?
I mean, I think we're living in pretty much a golden age of environmental writing at the moment. I mean, we've gone from quite kind of dry, descriptive, scientific writing in many respects to this kind of blossoming area of, you know, environmental investigation, discovery, through to fiction, climate fiction, cli-fi. It's a really kind of interesting area. Much more kind of interesting kind of narratives and characters and tales being told now, I feel. So yeah, there's lots of books. I mean, the classics, obviously Barry Lopez, Arctic Dreams, Rachel Carson, Silent Spring. Those are the kind of, you know, the books of E.O. Wilson are really good in this area. But lots of recent books too. I just read Weather, the Jenny Offal book, which is kind of climate kind of fiction book recently. That was very good. The work of Elizabeth Colbert and David Wallace Wells on climate change is just excellent, just superb writing. Yeah, Lydia Millett, very good book as well on the climate issue. So I mean, there's lots of really good. Michelle Nunn has Beloved Beasts. It's another book I read last year. So there's yeah, just I could go on. there's lots out there. I think I would encourage people to grab as much environmental writing as they can, because we're certainly in the kind of, I mean, we're in an alarming era in many respects, but it's inspiring some really great work in terms of literature and non-fiction and fiction writing.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you mentioned some of the classics. I was curious about you know, which of those classics, the older books that you referred to, kind of what did you encounter first, and was that, you know, how did that stir you?
Yeah, I mean, I think Silent Spring was so kind of seminal. I mean, I've read it a couple of times now. It's still, and I think just the freshness of it, still the fact that it's so relevant now. I mean, the issues that Carson was talking about in 1962 are pretty much still with us now. You know, the names may have changed, but the underlying forces still feel the same. So, yeah, I think I'd encourage people to pick up a copy of that if they never have.
Yes, I think I would definitely second that. But I'd also encourage people to pick up a copy of your book, and I hope they will.
And yours too.
Oh, thank you, Oliver. Yes. Yeah. So I'm not sure whether Emily's going to come back in at the end. What the plan is.
We are.
Oh.
Yeah.
There's Insect Crisis. We have a link. Purchase it at whatever your favorite bookstore is, but if you'd like to get it from us, you can click on that. It'll show up in another window, so you can follow up after this event is over. I want to thank everybody, Sue Stuart-Smith and Oliver Milman from Boswell, and Emily would like to also join in.
Yeah, thank you both. This was a really fabulous discussion. I'm so happy to have been part of it today. And to echo what Daniel said, we also, I believe, will be getting a copy of the book in our bookstore as well. So any of our members or anyone visiting the Nature Center can also pick up a copy there.